Hello, and welcome everyone. I'm Elliot Volkman, reporter for TechCo, and today we have a wonderful treat. We're joined by Brian Solis, best-selling author, principal analyst at Altimeter, and an all-around incredibly well-established thought leader in the digital space. Just a few short months ago, Brian released his latest book, X, The Experience When Business Meets Design, and today we'll primarily be discussing his latest book, and then some of the latest technologies that are kind of possibly affecting businesses and experience in general. As I mentioned before, if at any time during this chat you have questions, feel free to use Blab or shoot some questions my way on Twitter at the Journalizer, whatever you prefer. But Brian, before we really dig into this, and although I have a vast understanding and kind of familiarity with your background, I'd love if you could just kind of share a little bit of insight into what you're currently doing and how or what has led you to this point.
Well, my day job is principal analyst at Altimeter Group, which was recently acquired by a company called Profit. So my research these days has focused quite a bit on customer experience, what's referred to as digital transformation, so studying how businesses are evolving in a digital economy. And then also innovation. I'm studying a ton of corporate innovation and also the sort of the intersection where traditional business meets sort of startup and what types of incubators, accelerators, funds, and acquisitions are resulting from those types of engagement. So I publish all of this research for free as sort of a way of helping decision makers better understand how to navigate these crazy times. And then I sort of moonlight over the last decade as a digital anthropologist, studying disruptive technologies' impact on society, culture, norms, values, behavior, expectations. And that's sort of what led to the books over the years, is that you can study what companies are doing, you can study what people are doing, but at the end of the day, someone's going to make sense of it all in a way that's just approachable and, I don't know, honestly inspiring, because these are hard times in which we live. They're getting crazier.
Sure.
And I think what we all could use is some help, and some direction, and maybe even validation, because what is common no matter what is that change is hard. And if we're waiting for someone to tell us what to do, we're on the wrong side of innovation.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Now, I'll be totally honest. Obviously, I unfortunately have not yet had the opportunity to read your book, although we're definitely going to be digging into that and actually plan to have a review up on TechCo, hopefully not too long. But with that said, a lot of this is, again, just very much focused on experience. And just out of curiosity, how exactly would you specifically define what experience is in a business setting?
I would. It's a real interesting question to ask, because one of the hardest things that I found was sort of the definition of that question. What is the answer to that? Because it's very personal, and it's something that a lot of folks talk about these days, but I don't know that they really think about it. And also, I don't know if they really think about it at a very personal level. The reason why this is a hard question to answer is because one of the things that I think most businesses don't do, or even authors or thought leaders, is I don't think that they put themselves in the shoes of real people. And at the same time, I don't know that they ever really get a chance to put themselves in the shoes of people trying to do the right thing in organizations. So I've lived on every side, which is why none of my friends actually get a chance to see me, because I'm always doing all of this stuff. Here's the answer. An experience is something that people feel. It's something that they sense, and it's something that they do. And this happens in every moment of truth, right? So it happens all the time, but it really matters in these moments of truth. And so the idea of experience then is, if this is going to happen, What do you do about it, right? And it should affect everything, your business, your products, your services, and they should all work toward this standard of trying to deliver the type of experience that people would want, based on what they're trying to do, based on what they can't do. More importantly, based on what they don't know they want, but they can't live without. And so I think this sets the stage for, which is what became the book X, for what I call experience architecture, how to better understand people, appreciate their differences, and then more importantly, lead that to really reimagine every aspect of business and customer engagement.
That's very interesting. That's definitely a different way of putting it that I've actually not heard in several of the past few years. When experience and user experience is just becoming a lot. Well, it's been around obviously for a long time, and architecture as well. But as we're kind of progressing, that's just really not a way that I've yet heard, and it seems to make a great deal of sense. So obviously with that said, personalization is going to be a big component to this. Being able to figure out who your your customers are, people who are really just kind of involved with any of this. But in your book, you discuss how having a great product alone is no longer going to be enough to win business. And further, neither marketing efforts nor the relationships a business has with their customers is going to be enough for them to succeed either. So above all, it really is the experience that you create that will result in that success. Without giving away the secret sauce, so to speak, of your book, what exactly does this mean for today's business?
I don't mind giving away the secret sauce. I mean, for not having read the book, you just really articulated its premise.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not asking you to do anything I didn't do myself, which was understand that as a business, we tend to do things the way we've always done them, even with new things, right? So we're given the gift of all of this new technology. We've got the ability to see people through data and behavior sets.
Mm-hmm.
We have the ability to let that inspire us, to change us, but we don't. We just follow the same processes based on the same perspectives, based on the same metrics that we've always done, right? That's legacy foundations, that's legacy measurements of success, that's legacy budgeting and resourcing, and that I don't know that that's going to fly much longer. This is why we're seeing so much disruption with startups coming out of everywhere. I mean, with Tech.co, you cover this every single day. But what I don't think we appreciate enough is with every Uber, with every Tinder, with every Airbnb, we are learning how to interact differently with businesses. We're learning how to interact from our own, what I call ecosystem, right? Because these businesses are literally catering to us, reminding us that we're the center of the universe, right? And I joke that, how long is too long to wait for an Uber? Well, it turns out the number's 4 minutes. Anything above 4 minutes, you're like, what's going on? It's like that Louis C.K. skit with Wi-Fi. It's like, this is ridiculous. Yet you have an app where you're having a car come to you, where you can see who the driver is, where they are, and all of the payments are just sort of facilitated behind the scenes. All of these things are becoming the new standard or expectations, and they're invisible for experience. And what that means for businesses now is you have to sort of understand what's different with the mobile user, the connected consumer, how they go through life, and then how would you reverse engineer that in order to optimize all aspects of experience, right? Or more importantly, how to fix things that are broken, how to remove friction, how to make a better product, and more importantly, like how to talk to people. Because if you think about it, most businesses today, and even this is true for Uber and Airbnb,
Mm-hmm.
they don't really think about the after the transaction, or how to help someone before the transaction. What if I just want to talk to somebody? And that, I think all of this technology is making us human again, and I think we have to build new infrastructures that sort of scale that, facilitate that, because one thing's for sure, personalization isn't retargeting. Personalization isn't marketing at people in bulk.
Sure.
Personalization isn't talking at people across all these different channels. It's going to require a different level of empathy, and I think people are going to have to realize that change actually starts with them.
Absolutely. I mean, at the base of it, we have to kind of figure out, what we want, you know, how we get into someone else's shoes and being able to, be able to facilitate that same kind of communication that we would have the same interest in. So I think that makes a great deal of sense. But with that said, there's also a lot of organizations that kind of try to mirror the experience approach. So there's now that whole trend of Uber for X. They seem to follow almost on rails how Uber is following these certain components that make it easier for us to interact with basic things such as hailing a ride. But there's other organizations that try to kind of mirror that attempt and sort of follow incorrectly what the experience really is. They just see kind of the high level versus trying to remove some of that friction. So where do you see a lot of these organizations are kind of getting hung up on? Is it they're trying to kind of break into a concept that seems to do well, or is it technology, or is it just a whole slew and mixture of components?
It's all of the above, right? I mean, and it's funny that you say the Uber of X. The whole idea of what I think this is all becoming is just this understanding of what I call the selfish economy, right? So people expect things to be on demand, right? To be their way, to almost pretend as if you know who I am and what I'm trying to do, or where I need to go, or what I can't do based on like, for example, why are my cleaners and shoe repair shops always closed on Sundays? Why are their hours mirroring my work hours during weekdays? I mean, there's just this level of just simplicity that things like Uber are teaching us, which is that you can challenge convention. Just because it's the way it's always been done doesn't mean that this is the future of business. So the reason why you have so many Uber ofs is essentially entrepreneurs and investors are finding simple ways to better cater to people who live active lifestyles, and whether those are digital or not, we were confined to the way that other companies offered their products and services, and that was fine until the Uber of ... right? And even just the things like Tinder, where you're learning new behavior sets or new gesture sets, like swiping left or swiping right. All of those things are having a profound impact on customer expectations and behaviors, whether they know it or not. There's this interesting stat. I've been doing a lot of work with Google on their micro moments lately, and there's this fantastic stat that people look at their phones 150 times a day. 1,500 times a week. And that's on the low level, right? And that adds up to about 177 minutes a day. And you can bet that with every app that you use, you're being programmed to think that businesses should cater to you the way that your favorite apps and services do, that things should be gesturally much more relevant, significant, right? You're also losing patience or focusing your patience. Your attention span is dropping, right? Your ability to come in and out of things is heightened. So these all at some point become sort of hyper expectations, whether vocalized or not, for how people want to do business or how people want to learn, for example. And the challenge is that most businesses haven't figured it out until some startup comes along and then teaches you that this is the way it should have always been done. So I'll give you an example. A lot of companies get caught up in what I call iteration, which is looking at all of these new technologies, but using them to just do the same things better, right? But if you look at what true innovation is, well, innovation is doing new things that create new value, right? And then when you have something like Uber that comes along, well, that's disruption because it's doing new things that make the old ones obsolete. Most people who use an Uber will never go back to taxis, and that's the point. And that's where true disruption comes in. It's just a matter of time until your company that you do business with every day, you might actually have a reluctant relationship with them and not even know it until something comes along that just shows you wow, this is just such a fantastic way, it makes the old way of doing things obsolete.
I think that is just absolutely well put. That I think there's a few questions now I have to follow up on with that, but you know, so the reality is, you know, disruption obviously does bring awareness to a lot of the friction that we might not be aware of. Well, repeating myself there, but yeah. So in reality, you know, when Uber came in, obviously, you know, most of us would not touch a cab again unless, you know, we're in an area where it just really doesn't have this sufficient inventory and supply to get that. But um, prior to that, are there ways that organizations are actually trying to go out of their way to create disruption within itself to build those new experiences? Or, you know, is the primary way right now that we're just relying on organizations to come in and wreck their shit and you know, just kind of, you know, trying to adapt and survive after whatever reckoning they provide?
Well, I don't know. This is, I mean, yes. I think I think what I'd like to see is more people understanding that this is a people business, right? If you think back to the four P's of marketing, as I was taught, you know, price, promotion. Some of the things that were missing from the four P's, which are now glaringly obvious that we should have had them there all along, are people, purpose, promise, because all of these technologies are teaching us that we are at the center of all of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going backwards, right? It's
Right.
only going to accelerate. It's only going to further both unite us and fragment sort of our ability to operate this world as designed. So I think that disruption happens to us or because of us, right? I think you have a choice. You do nothing, you're disrupted. If you do something, well, digital Darwinism, as I call it, which is the evolution of technology in society, and how each one of them complements each other's sort of direction. It's inevitable. You have a choice in where you are or where you end up. But it's hard because a lot of businesses, whether you're small businesses or a large enterprise, you have to operate in things that sort of are natural inhibitors to change and evolution, which are, you know, politics, egos, self-preservation, skepticism. So a lot of very common, you know, I often say common things like psychology, for example. And I always say, oh, the humanities of it all, because I think what businesses need are a little bit more of social science in
Mm-hmm.
sort of business transformation, because as you pointed out, and like I believe, if disruption is a choice, right, then the point is, what are you doing about it?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's happening already, right? And you have to think about, well, what are you making your investments in today? Are you making them in terms of shareholder and stakeholder value? Are you looking at those types of dividends and metrics that then just sort of preclude natural innovation in terms of customer centricity or even employee centricity? I mean, if you think about to what extent disruption is happening in the organization today, if you talk to someone in HR and you say, hey, what's some of your biggest challenges today? They're going to tell you, millennials. Like that's their answer, right? Well, what's the problem with millennials? Well, they don't want to work the way that, you know, we've been working for the last decades. They want to have a bigger impact in the organization. They want to learn more than we're teaching them. They want to be validated and measured more often than our current measurement processes offer. They want to be able to teach people what the world is through their eyes. And I kind of look at them and I say, well, what's the problem with any of that? Honestly,
Right.
so they're just trying to push the boundaries and work the way that they work outside of this company, right? Every company should then start to wonder, well, do you have millennial customers? Because if your employees are trying to do things differently, wouldn't you imagine that your customers are doing things differently? Let's just say there was such a thing as millennials as sort of this aggregate, you know, sweep all descriptor, wouldn't just then the very nature of people trying to do things differently then inspire you to say, well, maybe I'm the one who's in the way? And that's where disruption can creep right in, right? Because the biggest inhibitor to change is cognitive bias or validation bias.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see the world as it is, you see the world as you are. When you go to look at this, let's just say you're even moved, you literally find all the things that validate your cognitive bias.
Sure.
And you then tend to surround yourself by people who sort of have the same sort of agreement. So you don't actually make an impact. And when you do say, hey, let's bring a team together to look at all of this new technology to figure out what to do about it, you're operating still based on a legacy perspective and operating system. So it's like that old saying, we'll think outside of the box. All right, let's think outside of the box. We're going to book an hour meeting in Outlook so that we can think outside of the box. Yet, thinking outside of the box is still governed by the same norms and values as the box we just got outside of. Mm-hmm. But a good friend of mine, Chris Hewer, he likes to remind people, like, there's no box. This is all a blank canvas. And as a result, I came up with this funny saying as I was writing the book, like, look, I also tried to be innovative once, but I got stuck in meetings all day. But none of that is going to change the fact that there are outside forces that are affecting you. And disruption, again, is probably already creeping in. And I think every business, even Uber, has a disruption event on its horizon. It's just what you do now that either prevents it or just uses a judo move and just swings it into your favor.
Absolutely. I think it makes a great deal of sense.
I hope so.
Getting a little bit mind blown here as far as the psychology of it all, but I think at the base of it, obviously, that just makes a great deal of sense. But for an established organization, how do they try to embrace that disruption creep? Like, is there, I can't imagine that having an internal hackathon is going to be like the leading success project that'll help them avoid any kind of competitor coming in. But do you see that there are organizations who have been around for 20 plus years actually trying to refocus their efforts outside of their 1 hour outside of the box meetings to kind of figure out what like the next steps are? Are they bringing people in? What are some of the ways that they're trying to get rid of some of that disruption creep?
Well, it's all over the map, right? This is one of the reports I published recently was companies investing in full-blown innovation centers. So in the Valley or in other places around the world. And why were they doing that? And so some of the big reasons for doing that were to attract new talent, better understand new technologies, and also how to better understand the digital customer and employee behavior and expectations. And they needed to open an innovation center to do that because they were operating within a culture that was essentially established and confining, right? And to be innovative, sometimes you have to get out of that. That's one way. Other companies are doing something as simple as taking innovation tours, like they're visiting Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, sort of trying to drink the Kool-Aid or drink the water a little bit. They're forming innovation teams to look into all of these things and try to bring all of that stuff back into the organization. But I think more importantly, where we see real traction is in what's called digital transformation, right? And so this is the investment in new processes, services, systems, models to compete in a digital economy, while also introducing new values to employees and customers. It's a pretty intense sort of investment that happens in stages, which is why I have a new report coming out called the 6 Stages of Digital Transformation. But a lot of this is done with intent. So how are customers different? Where is their friction? Or how are employees different? How do we attract better talent? They start with specific things, and then they bring people together to solve for them. What ends up happening is that, of course, like anything, there's a lot to learn, and as you learn, you start to change little aspects of it by starting with little pilot programs and spreading them over, and then putting together a steering committee to manage this growth and change process. And essentially what you end up getting to is good old-fashioned change management, but this time with purpose, as centered around how people are different, and how to deliver what they want. So the answer is big, right? But I'll tell you what isn't working. Business as usual. R&D centers. R&D centers are still operating against old paradigms, and so they're tending not to move as quickly as what's necessary. And a big inhibitor to any of this is culture, right? In fact, it's such a big deal that I'm probably going to start dedicating more of my work to it, because it's such an elusive, squishy conversation, and it's one of those words that you could say and people automatically like just, I've lost all interest in this conversation. Because if you think about businesses today, we have more of a management culture than a leadership culture, and innovation, and especially in the face of disruption, takes leadership, right? And leadership doesn't necessarily have to come from the top. It could also come from the middle. It could come from guys like us who are trying to really do something cool and different, and having to then bring it up within the ranks. And culture is sort of the net effect of how you either run a management or a leadership environment, right? It's a reflection of people's values, norms, how they see one another, how they value one another. It's basically all very human things, but it's the number one catalyst for change, or the number one inhibitor for change. And it's something I think that takes intent in order to really bring together a culture of people who feel like they can do things beyond just, oh, this is what I was hired for, this is how I'm measured, because that's no longer going to cut it.
Absolutely. And I cannot tell you how many startups or organizations that I profile, and I ask them, so, can you describe your culture? And they'll give me like 4 or 5 core values and be like, that's our culture. It's like, I feel like there's a little bit more to it.
Yeah, culture is usually something that we put on a wall, right? And it's just, I don't know. I mean, I just have to figure out how to make the culture conversation sexy and compelling enough for CEOs to really think differently about. I mean, if you think about human resources, the name of itself just implies we're caring about human beings.
Right.
But it tends to be, or words like employee engagement, which is a real big buzzword right now. But I've studied all these things, and to most companies, employee engagement is how do you talk to your employees? How do you take your core values and your messages and bring them to employees so that you feel like you're engaging them in the direction of the company? That's not employee engagement, right? And that's not culture, and that's not human resources. One of the biggest threats to companies today is the aging workforce, right? And sort of the lack of urgency, or just even understanding or appreciation that they need to do something in order to compete at an employee level, but also at a company level against all of these threats of disruption and digital Darwinism. And that's the biggest challenge, because most employees feel like they're just biding time until their retirement or what have you. But their new young employees are coming in with a greater assessment and a greater array of real world expertise. Aging employees, and by that I mean just sort of workforces based on what they know, not what their age is, have to understand that we're all becoming students again. I mean, look, I'm an author, right? 7 books. And what I did with this book was to do what I've always done: start sharing everything I know, how I do it, the way I write it, the format it goes into. And I realized that's part of the problem. In order to be competitive as an author today, or just a human being, I have to better understand, well, who's my audience? How do they process information? What are they trying to learn? How do they learn? What are their goals and aspirations? How can I help them get there? What then, go crazy. Like what's a book in 2016? What could it be? What should it be based on behavior today? So I had to learn. It was arduous, man. It was debilitating. It sucked most of the way through because I was literally unlearning, which was hard,
Hmm.
and then learning, which was hard.
Sure.
So that is, I think, to some extent, the level of which any company has to understand not just what culture is, but how do you develop a workplace where people feel that they need to learn, that they're rewarded to learn, more so that they're rewarded to take risks. And all of this because this is coming down from a leadership organization.
Absolutely. And I think that's an incredibly important point to kind of come across, whether you're a startup or just an established organization. But I do want to kind of dial back to what your approach was with the book itself. I actually read that a lot of the tools and resources and information that you're discussing in that book, it was very much applied to how it was crafted and put together. Can you maybe dig into exactly what that means? Does it go into like the imagery? Does it go into the formatting or even the size of the book and shape? How did that kind of all come together?
Yeah, well, there was a great sense of irony. The book's about experience design, right? So how to design meaningful experiences for people, and in every step of the journey, right? And it really has to take you through the journey of what an experience is and how one matters, what those moments are, so that you could design individually and then holistically, right? So there was a great sense of irony in trying to develop a story around experience design in a book, because the experience of reading the book hasn't really changed much
Sure.
in a long time, right? Aside from the cover, you're still largely dealing with templates for chapters, tables of contents, Times New Roman fonts, bibliographies, right? But I wrote the book and then had this great epiphany, like, well, what if I decided to use the book as a metaphor for experience, but more than a metaphor, a physical example of a great experience? What could that look like? And so I partnered with my friends over at Mechanism, which is a real awesome cutting edge design and advertising / marketing storytelling firm. And I've known the founders for a really long time, and they do some of the coolest things that you've seen that's on the Super Bowl, on television, online. And I thought, if anybody's going to be up to the challenge, it's going to be these guys. So we kind of hatched this evil plan for rethinking what a book could be, how a book could be experiential today. And I used high school students as sort of my muse,
Mm-hmm.
in a clean and good way, because I realized that you would misinterpret the idea of how, here are kids who are the masters of digital domain. High school students are largely digital first, right?
Mm-hmm.
Meaning that even millennials still had to deal with analog things, and yet they have textbooks that really haven't changed much since we were kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt, well, like, if you had to design a textbook for them to be reminiscent and intuitive, just like their screens, but more so knowing that kids are still learning in all that they do online, what are those triggers? What promotes retention? How does someone use their favorite apps to be more engaged, to share more, to turn the proverbial page, to dive deeper into certain subjects, right? How to get them to stop surfing the web at shallow levels, sourcing things like Wikipedia,
Right.
and feel compelled to take it to a different level. And I studied all of that. The book took 3.5 years to put together, but the idea was, what could a book be, right?
Mm-hmm.
Turns out that we were just scratching the surface in what we ended up doing with this. This is the shape of an iPad Air. It is 4-color. To get to 4-color, you have to have thicker paper. But I don't want people to just think it's a designed book, because there's certainly been designed books over, especially art books and coffee table books. It is an analog app. It was wireframed. It was developed to emulate favorite apps that people use. It was designed to present information in ways that people can naturally process. But that meant I had to relearn how to write sentences, right, to engage the brain differently. I had to learn how many of the sentences could come together and form a paragraph, and how many paragraphs can you have before you need sort of visual learning. Then you have to translate paragraphs into visual learning. When do you need white space to sort of promote a natural break so people feel like they could keep going? Sure. Down to the level of like, do we even need a table of contents anymore? What's the purpose of a chapter? How do you structure information so that you feel like you're going through bursts of learning without feeling overwhelmed? Like, oh my gosh, how many more pages are left in this chapter? How many more chapters do I have to go? So all of those things, really led to a different type of design, a different use of space. I started with the blank slate. The idea of a table of contents became something that's pretty much familiar to your home screen on your mobile phone. You don't have to read it left to right. You can come in. I don't know if you can see the color coding, but each color is a related theme. So you could just sort of tackle those sections and hop around as you'd like. So that was it, really understanding of what could you do to make the book a better experience. And then lastly, having to tell a publisher, hey, let's come up with an entirely new way to make a book. And, thankfully they were supportive, but they said, have at it, right? It's not anything that they had expertise to do. So I can tell you though, that one of the most interesting insights that's come from this is that you're going to see a lot of books that look like it. I did it with my last book as well, because I actually started my last book after I started this book. I took a break to publish that one. It's called WTF for those who want to see. You're going to start to see a lot of design books like this, but they're not going to have the UI, the UX, the experience design meant for basically becoming an analog app. They're just going to be very beautiful, but not intellectually and emotionally engaging in the way that this one was designed to be. And that was, look, man, it was hard. And I wanted to quit 1,000 times. And I think I missed every deadline to the point where the publisher said, you either do this or you don't. And so we had to put it out, but it's incomplete in my opinion, in terms of all of the things we wanted to do. But could I redesign the textbook? Absolutely. But that means you also have to rewrite what a textbook delivers based on how someone learns today. So the design is just one function of it.
Very interesting. So, now correct me if I'm wrong, but kind of back in the day, did you start as a developer yourself?
We did, actually, a programmer as a kid. Yeah. I started with basic Fortran, COBOL, and I always figured I was going to be a programmer, and actually never made any of my, well, that's not true. My first job was a database programmer and manager, but aside from that, that was short-lived, because then I just started on this whole crusade against all things traditional, in terms of marketing, in terms of how people do business, in terms of how people talk about technology, and was a little bit distracted over the last 20 years or so trying to solve for the future of business, until I realized that the best way to do so was to publish research, to show people where we're missing opportunities, to show people at a very human level how the world is changing, and sort of take the idea of what programming is today to reprogram through words and visuals how we think about business and society and life.
That's very cool. That's very interesting too. So I just have one final question for you, which is directly relevant. But how did you transition? So in my mind, it's kind of like a left brain, right brain situation, where as someone who is a developer and programmer, you kind of led into the complete opposite side of the spectrum, which is now really focused on the humanity and psychology of it all. But how do you really get developers and such analytical people to really focus and understand the importance of experience, and really how this particular book might be able to help kind of get them out of the box, which is just focusing on very clean code and focusing on kind of innovative concepts?
If I had an answer for that, I probably wouldn't be here right now.
It was worth a try.
There's elements of it too, right? So as an analyst, I remember publishing my first report with Altimeter Group, and I looked at it and I said, "Gosh, this thing. I mean, it's a great report, but it's ugly and it sucks." And for a firm that studies disruptive technology, why wouldn't we disrupt the way that we publish research, right? And so there's just this ongoing balance between the right and left brains that I think we all could get better at, because I think we take things for granted just simply because, well, this is how we're supposed to operate. But just because the mind is analytical, or just because it operates on one lobe or the other, doesn't necessarily mean that it couldn't learn how to think different. And I think that's really what we all have to do, is because, if you look at everything around you, everything's ripe for disruption. I mean, just look at the remote control in your TV room. I mean, that thing is, every time you turn on the TV, you're stepping back in time. Or the fact that we click a save icon in Word, right? That's a 3.5-inch diskette. There are so many aspects. Or look at your TV. Your guide on your cable box, right, and compare it to a 1971 TV Guide magazine, right? They're very similar, and it's because we haven't actually started to think about, am I part of the problem or am I part of the solution? And that means that we have to straddle both lobes in order to understand that what we do very well is limited only by whom or what we allow to measure it today, right? But what I think everybody can appreciate is that the world is changing, and that means that those measurements, those values, those systems are also changing along with it. So that means that what we do can only be better if we allow ourselves to be measured differently, and if we allow ourselves to be part of the creativity process that then redefines the measurement standards. Imagine those possibilities. And so what I try to do is inspire everybody to recognize that when they're challenging convention, they're not being an asshole, right? That they're actually just trying to find new ways of doing things that feel more natural or feel more productive. And that's, I didn't figure that out until the last 10 years of my life. I was told, you think one way or you think the other, right? These are the rules, you follow them. If you challenge them, then you're demoted or you're fired for it. And I think if you learn anything from Silicon Valley or entrepreneurs anywhere, is that they're just simply trying to do what they believe is the right thing to do. And there's nothing wrong with that. And some of the best developers I know have to think with both lobes in order to get anything done or accomplished. But I think at the end of the day, what I want to try to do is remind leaders and managers that we're going to have to encourage this type of behavior out of people. And then also to everybody else, is that you're not going to get anywhere if you don't start to challenge the system. And it's a good thing when you do, and it's also a good thing when you try and fail and learn. So the answer is in all of this, and that's what I'm trying to do with the book. It's what I try to do in my presentations. It's what I try to do in my research, is to look at any report that I've published in the last year or two, and you'll see that it's pushing the boundaries of even what traditional analysis is supposed to look like, right? It's also introducing storytelling and human engagement into this, to recognize, like, hey, listen, as you read this data that or as my quant or qual, based methodologies, know that I get you and I know what you're struggling with, and use this as a way to do X, Y, and Z, because I've seen what's possible when you do it.
That is awesome. I think that's a great answer to probably what I would call an impossible question. So that's definitely a well-put way of covering it. So I know I said I have one last question, but this one's more important. Where can people learn more about you, and also, of course, find the book?
Well, they can learn more about me at briansolis.com or at briansolis, pretty much on any platform. The book you can get at Amazon or your favorite bookstore near you, or just go to xthebook.com.
Wonderful. Well, with that, I really appreciate your time, and I think this has been incredibly informative. I urge everyone to absolutely go and check that out, as well as check out Brian's other collection of books. You have a lot of fantastic stuff. Personally, Engage is a favorite of mine. You just have a lot of great information, um, and definitely check out his Twitter feed as well. Always a lot of awesome little snippets of information that comes out there as well.
Well, thanks, Elliot. I appreciate the time, and definitely really enjoyed this conversation. You asked some really great questions, and a book is on its way to you, so I can't wait to see what you think.
Awesome. Can't wait to dig in.